Good morning and welcome to Great Tree Zen Women's Temple. This morning our speaker is the Reverend Issan Koyama. But first we'd like to have an opening sutra. Reverend Chimyo, would you start us off with the opening sutra, please?
Unsurpassed, penetrating and perfect Dharma is rarely met with even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to remember and accept, we vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's teaching.
And now a brief message about Dana. In Buddhism, when Zen practitioners share their understanding of the teachings and practice, it is offered freely as a practice of Dana Paramita. Dana is a Pali word that means generosity or to give freely, and this practice is done without expectation of getting something in return. This is the spirit of speaking about the Dharma. Other ways to practice Dana is to offer support to those who share the teachings, to support places of spiritual practice, and to give without judgment or expectation when opportunity arises. Those who share the teachings at Great Tree do so on a Dana basis. Please support their practice by giving what you can. And in the chat is a place to send Dana to the Reverend Issan. And we hope that you would go there. All right, an introduction to our speaker this morning. The Reverend Issan Koyama is a Buddhist priest and disciple of Shohaku Okumura Roshi. He is originally from Japan and came to the US as a newspaper and TV journalist. In the early years of the AIDS epidemic, Issan volunteered for end-of-life care in New York City and subsequently became a professional caregiver. While working as a full-time hospice chaplain in the US, Issan co-established and managed a residence and medical facility in Japan that hosted geriatric palliative patients as well as family clinics. His work was featured in both American and Japanese mainstream media such as the New York Times, Asahi, Shimbun, NPR, Morning Edition, and the StoryCorps book Callings. Issan currently divides his time between USA and Japan, focusing on Dogen studies. Welcome.
Thank you very much. My name is Issan. A couple of years ago, I was also invited to be a part of the lecture series with Great Tree. And at that time, I was in Sanshinji. So I was on Zoom from Sanshinji. And I believe I actually forgot the theme of the series, but I decided to talk about one of my favorite sutra from Pali Canon called the Anglimala Sutra. It is about a serial killer who ended up becoming a Buddha's student. Now, this time I'm supposed to talk about, it's a series of, I think, introducing Okumura Roshi's students who contributed an essay to this book called Adding Beauty to Brocade. This book was published from Sanshinji as a commemoration of the 20th year anniversary since Okumura Roshi moved from Minnesota Zen Center to Bloomington, Indiana, and opened Sanshinji. And then I'm a part of it. So this is basically a reading from an essay I wrote, contributed to this book. This book has a theme of, Dogen has a writing, a fascicle called Shishobo. Shishobo is translated as Bodhisattvas for embracing action. And those four embracing actions are dana, giving, and loving speech, and beneficial action, and something called doji or dojigyo, It's very skillfully translated by my teacher, Okumura Roshi, as an identity action. It's a little difficult to understand what this identity action means. And of course, Dogen's writing really clearly illuminate that portion. What happened was a new abbot of Okumura Roshi, after Okumura Roshi retired, Hoko-san, asked all of us to pick one of the four subjects. And I immediately went to this Doji-gyo or Doji identity action. What I usually do is, Buddhist text is very difficult to read, don't you think? And then particularly Dogen's writing is quite difficult to examine. So what I usually do is I read and study, and then there's some portion of the Buddhist text, like sutras or Dogen's writing. If it strikes me very, emotionally, I keep that in my mind, just like you study koan, and then live my life. And then on the process of living my daily life, I often actually encounter what this teaching actually means. So I started to study with Okumura Roshi about 23 years ago, particularly for Dogen's writing. And this Shishobo is a very dear one for me, and particularly because this fourth one, identity action, Doji or Doji-gyo, was something I really wanted to kind of unwrap and taste and process it. So therefore, I immediately said I like to write something about Doji-gyo, Doji, identity action. So this is the portion that went into this book. I believe you have already invited several other contributors, Okumura Roshi disciple, who also has writings in this book. But my essay is quite short in comparison to the others. And if I just read it very slowly, like I usually normally talk very slowly in English, it probably takes only 20 minutes or 30 minutes. So I just like to read it through to start with. Particularly, some of you may not actually have this book because this was basically like an in-house project. Even though now you can get this book from all over the places, including Amazon, etc., etc. So maybe it is a good idea that I read this through so that people who are not familiar with this book or who are not familiar with what I do will know the whole story. By the way, Okumura Roshi, my teacher, retired officially last year in June. And then 2023 started out in a very odd way for me because I usually spend my winter Ango intensive practice period in Japan. So in Japan, I have a teacher whose name is Honda Tekifuro Roshi. He was 85 years old last year. And then while I was there, he got sick. And in January, on January 11th last year, to be precise, he died. So the whole year 2023 started with kind of a surprising beginning with me losing my Japanese teacher. And then coming back to the United States in spring, I went back to Sanshinji in June for the ceremony of my American teacher, Japanese American teacher, Okumura Roshi's retirement. So I was feeling actually kind of blue. I wouldn't call it as depression, but I was feeling really blue as if, I was kind of losing some sense of direction. Because for the last 20 some years, I was always at the beginning of the year deciding the whole year schedule in accordance with Okumura Roshi's schedule. Now he's retired and my teacher in Japan is gone. So when I arrived in June at the ceremony, but also the ceremony was also coincidentally the officially opening this book, releasing this book. I was so happy when I saw Teijo-san, Hassan has this kind of magnetic, characteristic of who's so open and who's so immediately likable. And when she shows up, she so brightens up the place right away. As a matter of fact, for the first time I met her some years ago, I told her it feels as if I know her for such a long time, even though I just met her and I spent like 5 minutes. So last year, she really made my day when I saw her coming to the ceremony as well. So thank you, Tejo-san. I understand you're sick today, and I hope you really take a very good care of yourself. So that's the basic story. And then I'm going to start to read my portion. I contributed to one of the 4 Bodhisattva action called Doji or Dojigyo Identity Action. My portion is titled as Living Together, Dying Together. I used to live in Washington Heights in New York City, which has the highest elevation on Manhattan Island. On top of the hill is a beautiful historic park, Fort Tryon Park. Although the elevation is merely 100 feet above sea level, Manhattan is basically on the sea level. So if elevation is 100 feet, it's like a really high place. So therefore, because the park faces west, there is a sweeping view from this park. Under the sharp cliffs, you can see the Hudson River. Across the immense body of water is New Jersey, another sharp cliff of the Palisades, and the view into the vast American continent. I loved to take walks along the beautiful planned English flower gardens of this park, particularly around sunset. As the sun set over the continental horizon, the last ray of sunlight hits the flower garden horizontally. With the clarifying last ray of the day, everything is completely exposed. There is no shade, no hidden spot. All are exposed by strong light. All the flowers, plants, and trees then look so different, revealing every detail. After a long day of work at the hospice, which was often exhausting both physically and mentally, this felt like a beautiful, clear metaphor of our lives and was very healing for me. Among those of us who are engaged in the end-of-life care, it is often said that at the end of life, all the issues of our lives we have neglected dealing with and somehow kept pushing aside for various reasons tend to be explosively exposed and made obvious. And we have no other choice but to face them and come to some sort of resolution and reconciliation. This is how we come to understand what has happened in the course of our lives and what it means to us. The year 2023 marks the 20th year anniversary of Sanshin Zen Community. It is also the 40th anniversary of my arrival in the United States. After graduating from college in Japan, I got a job with an American-owned international media company as a newspaper and television reporter. This job first brought me to France in 1981. Then in 1983, I accepted a position at their headquarters in New York City. My job was to report on the arts, entertainment, lifestyle, and fashion. My office was in Greenwich Village, Manhattan. At first, the job I was assigned for sounded fun, glamorous, and exciting. However, it didn't take me much time to realize that I had just landed right in the epicenter of the early AIDS epidemic, working with the progressive artist community of downtown New York in the 1980s, which is basically gay community. I was diving headfirst into a tragic and chaotic time for New York City. I used to have the habit of going through my Rolodex I understand you probably know what Rolodex means. Recently, when I'm talking to a younger group of people, they'd have like, what? This is used to be some sort of office gadget. We place it on the table, on the desk, and there's a card, and you fill in the card, and it kind of rolls around, and you pull up the card, and the card has the name and address, contact information. Currently, we don't have those things anymore. But anyway, we have that Rolodex, and habit to going through my Rolodex to remove the cards I no longer needed. By 1986, I was pulling nearly 1/4 of the cards out to throw them away. One year, I went to a few funerals. And then the next year, I was going to a funeral every month. And my calendar was dotted with memorial services all over the place. Every day, I would see beautiful young men and women start to deteriorate and die in front of my eyes, as if documentary films reviewing their lives were suddenly playing on fast forward because of some terrible mistake. This inevitably made me think seriously about the issues of life and death, and what was going on for what I was doing for work. We spend so much time on work. Particularly at that time, I was kind of all alone with 2 assistants in this division. So I used to work nearly 12 hours a day. So I was part of this highly commercialized promotion machine, which kept on spinning out beautiful, illusory visual image of eternal beauty, youth, sensual desires, while in reality, I was surrounded by the stark, undeniable reality of impermanence, incurable illness, physical and psychological suffering and death. In another word, I'm a typical case of people who enter Buddha's way, including Shakyamuni Buddha went through something similar. So I'm basically very ordinary traditional pattern. When I looked to world religion and spiritual practice for solace, I found that the Buddhist teachings offered the answer I was seeking. I started a serious practice of Zazen and study and became a volunteer at an AIDS ward. I think some people among you do remember this time. In the large cities in the United States, most of the large healthcare organizations started to have an AIDS ward because of the immense numbers of the patients coming in. My interests in life and my understanding of how to make the best use of my time in this world started shifting drastically. By the beginning of the millennium, I found myself abandoning my former work in media entirely to become a full-time hospice chaplain for the nation's second largest healthcare organization in New York City. There was a period of time which almost stems into 10 years. I didn't make a drastic change so drastically. It was a very slow process of something started to seep in with me, and I started to question. And there's a process of I go to a volunteer for AIDS World once a week, and then started to twice a week. And then I get interested in what's actually happening over the night. So I take the next day for deadband shift, etc., etc. So there's a slow process of shifting of interest. And then, of course, I had to go to school, so you have to reduce the time of work. In the meanwhile, you have a household you have to make living for. So this isn't really like sudden change. So it's a process of 10 years. And then by the end of those 10 years, I did work for as a full-time position as a hospice chaplain. And by that time, I kept on going back to my hometown in Japan, and I opened my own geriatric hospice project there. It was a very busy time, going back and forth and back and forth. When a huge earthquake occurs in one part of the world, the rippling effects propagate outward from the epicenter until the entire globe feels the impact. It is really true, isn't it? In this way, throughout the vastness of Indra's net, I don't think I need to explain what Indra's net to you, because you all know this term. This is his whole universe. Whenever an event makes a strong impact in one particular place, such as in the case of wars, catastrophic accidents, or natural disasters, the rippling effects eventually shake up every part of Indra's net. Well, as a matter of fact, in the past 4 years or so, we really experienced this. A little thing that happened in Wuhan, in China, eventually swamped all of us for years. They traveled to every part of the network of interdependent origination. Network of interdependent origination is my teacher, Okumura Roshi's wording for this entirety. Wonderful invention of the word. And no matter how far away a place might be from the original event, it feels the reverberations. However, we are often unable to see or acknowledge this fact. Instead, we really believe that isolated events that take place far away have nothing to do with us, nothing to do with our lives. One of the most interesting things about end-of-life care is that we are the last recipients of these waves created by the merging, ripple effects of the countless events. And the last wave shows us most clearly what exactly all these events have done to us, just like the last rays of sunlight mercilessly or mercifully expose every detail of the flower garden in Tryon Park without leaving anything hidden. In time, well, for instance, in my own lifetime, another generation reaches hospice age, so to speak. During my lifetime, I have witnessed the prolonged suffering and harm World War II did to people. When I started out this work in 1980s, there was still last rippling wave of the people who had a traumatic experience and who had never really healed out of it from World War, coming to the hospice age. And then I have also learned about the traumas experienced by the people who are involved in the Korean War and the Vietnam War. Now, many of us are meeting the people from those younger generation who had really traumatic experiences in Afghanistan, etc., etc. So it just continues. Some people are never able to find the resources that they needed to heal themselves, and ended up living very hard lives until their entry into hospice care. One after another, as we encountered these people entering end-of-life care, we were forced to face and acknowledge the true reality of what these devastating wars have done to individual lives and to society as a whole. The hospice organization I worked with had an inpatient unit in a large hospital in East Village, which is home to a community of Ukrainian immigrants. New York City is also home to many Russian Jewish immigrants as a result of anti-Semitism in Soviet Russia. From the beginning of the millennium and into the 2010s, this is around the time I became a full-time for hospice work. So this was also particularly impact-making to me. From the beginning of the millennium and into the 2010s, we experienced a curious phenomena. Our hospice began receiving a series of new intakes who had been affected by Chernobyl. I believe Chernobyl is pronounced by Ukrainian Russian language more like a Chernobyl. So I would be pronouncing Chernobyl or Chernobyl either way. Nuclear power plant accident, the famous one, yes. A couple of years ago, I think it was a few years ago, HBO did an incredible documentary drama series on this accident, and I highly recommend you to go visit HBO. Now it's released for the other streaming services. The inpatient unit for hospice care is a place for emergency medical interventions. When a patient experiences an acute condition that cannot be managed elsewhere, they are brought to the inpatient unit until the crisis is resolved. Though some can go back home after successful reassessment of symptom management, very often death occurs while the patients are still in the inpatient unit. The atmosphere of the inpatient unit is often both somber and panicky. I was a part of a 3-person team of chaplains who covered the inpatient unit at the hospital. We worked in rotation, and I went there 2 days a week, including Fridays. In its heydays, this inpatient unit had been on the AIDS ward, taking up an entire floor of the hospital building. By this time, however, the number of the people dying of AIDS had drastically decreased, and the hospital had converted half of the floor into a maternity department. It was a striking contrast between just over one door to short corridor entering into another door. One portion is a hospice, and another portion is the baby, newborn baby. After spending many somber hours on the hospice side of the floor, I would always spend some time looking at the newborn babies through the large glass window. It was so cute. Before going home. For me, it was almost like going to Dogen and watching those puppies running around. It's really wonderful. This would bring back a wholesome sense of balance and widen my perspective to include the entire spectrum of life. One Friday, now I'm talking about one particular incident. One Friday, I started my day at the northern tip of Manhattan's east side, visiting patients' homes one after another, from uptown to downtown. It was a particularly demanding day. Each visit took a little longer than usual. By the time I finally arrived at the inpatient unit downtown, it was already nearly 6 p.m., and the caregivers team was shifting the night team. As I checked in at the nursing station, the receptionist told me a patient's daughter was requesting to see a chaplain, had been waiting for me to arrive for quite some time. So I felt a little embarrassed that I arrived very late. And the patient's room was towards the end of the corridor, one door away from the exit leading to the maternity department. I found it was so symbolic. As I entered the dimly lit room, I saw there was a man in the hospital bed who appeared closer to middle age rather than old. So he didn't particularly look like, so to speak, hospice age person. He was more like almost robust, at the almost height of manhood type of age. The man was lying still. From his characteristic erratic breathing, it was obvious the man was actively dying. There was a young woman sitting in a chair beside the bed. She sat slightly hunched towards the patient, as if she were paying close, careful attention to him. From the back, she looked petite and demure, almost like a young child. I called out softly, introduced myself as a chaplain, and inquired about the reason for her request. My voice is originally not very strong, but after 20-some years working in hospice, I acquired this habit of speaking very softly. So often I am asked by people when I'm speaking, Issan, can you speak a little more loudly? But this is because of this habit. And I also have a personally long history of illness. I have been in the hospital, hospitalized for not just days, but weeks, several times. starting from my childhood. When I was very young as I can't really remember very well, I contracted the scarlet fever, which was quite uncommon in Japan, even my time. So one of my oldest memory is being so sick in bed, and some people approaches me with a loud voice, and how unpleasant it was. So you really understand the other side of the story. So when I approach to the people, I usually speak very slowly, softly. So if I'm speaking too softly, please let me know. I try to speak a little more loudly. The young woman turned around to face me, still in the chair. I was wearing my name tag on a chain dangling from my neck at the level of my chest. So the name tag was the first thing she saw because she's sitting. I sensed her looking intensely at the name printed on the tag, Reverend Issan Koyama. Then she stood up with a look of surprise and asked, "Are you Japanese?" I always freeze for a moment when someone asks me this question. In this hugely diverse city in New York City, it is inevitable that some people will love certain ethnicities and hate others for a multitude of historical and cultural reasons. In my work, I have met patients who refused my visits due to my ethnicity based on events that took place between their ancestors and my ancestors decades or even centuries ago. After all, the present time contains all that has happened in the past. This present moment includes everything that has happened, doesn't it? So in our work, of course, we respect patients with preferences. But to be honest, this type of the interaction always generates thoughts and emotion that can be rather uncomfortable. So I timidly answered, yes. This produced a surprising response from her. She grasped my hand with both of her hands and thanked me for being Japanese profusely and emotionally. This was the first time I had ever been thanked for just being Japanese. I was quite surprised, but what she told me afterwards, however, explained it all. Her father, the patient, had been at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant at the time of the accident and had been exposed to radiation. The family was of Jewish heritage. Since religion was not allowed by the communist regime, the daughter had no knowledge, information, or experience regarding her family's religious traditions. Oppressed by the strong anti-Semitic tendencies of Soviet society, the family eventually immigrated to the United States. During the time following the Chernobyl accident, it was very difficult for her to obtain any accurate information concerning what exactly had happened to her father, and what would happen to him as a result. After settling in the United States, a strong wish to provide the best possible care for her father made her decide to go to school to become a medical professional. She, at the time of my meeting her, was a registered nurse, a case manager at that time already. In addition, she made every effort to collect as much information about the consequences of exposure to nuclear radiation as possible, so that she would be able to take appropriate measures to care of her father. It was difficult and time-consuming to search for this information. Then, one day, she discovered the detailed accounts left by those who had suffered from the radiation released by the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bombs. The information included a documentary film produced immediately after the bombings, which had been kept secret by the American military for over 20 years before being returned to Japan. The documentary featured unbearably graphic close-up images of the ravaged bodies of the victims, one after another. I personally knew this documentary very well. I was in the elementary school in Japan. This was, I think it was late 1970, when this controversial documentary was returned to Japan by the US. I was born in 1955, 10 years after the end of the Pacific War. So 20 years after is a 60 something year, 1960 something. So I was sixth grade in elementary school when this documentary was exposed to us. And in the middle of the summer vacation, students, including elementary school students, were urged to gather in the school auditorium for a special viewing of the film. This is a very medical film. I believe it was shown on August 6th on Hiroshima Day, the day Hiroshima bombing happened. The intention of the school administrators, actually, it probably came from the Ministry of Education as a government state-wise, was to show the devastating consequences of the war to the young so that they might grow up to be adults who support world peace. But the film was way too much for 12-year-old me. It was chilly scientific observation and graphic raw footage of unimaginable injuries, extreme burns and scars, and destroyed flesh, bones, and organs. After the screening, I was so scared that I had to sleep with the lights on for many weeks. The memory of the film stayed with me so vividly that I intentionally avoided the memorial sites, the Museum of Hiroshima and Nagasaki for a long time, despite my frequent visits to Japan. I actually spent some time in Japan every year since 1983, back and forth. And I do have a chance to go visit those places, but I didn't until quite recently. As a matter of fact, today I see Michelle on the screen. Michelle and Catherine and Louise, four of us went to visit, I revisited, and for them it was first time, Nagasaki's Atomic Bomb Information Center. It was quite touching, wasn't it? But I didn't do that for a long time. While the patient's daughter spoke about her discoveries, my mind took me back to my own past. I'm trying to go through this as this book title of the book says, Adding Beauty to Brocade. You know, we vertical thread and then horizontal thread, immense numbers of that. And then when we meet, there's some little things starts to happen. And then we create all this beautiful brocade. So I'm trying to bring all these memories and experiences that comes in and create this meeting with this woman. So for me, it is in accordance with the title of the book about the brocade. So she continued to talk about her discovery of the many life stories left by the hibakusha. Hibakusha is the word United Nations recently uses officially. It's a globally recognized term for all those who have suffered from exposure to radiation from nuclear weapons. Their detailed reports describe the progression of their ailments, the keloid scars covering their bodies, the discrimination they suffer in the society when ignorant people mistook their wounds for contagious diseases, their sense of despair and fear, and above all, their courage, bravery, and determination to keep on living and to let the world know what happened to them so that the future generation might recognize the horror of nuclear weapons and appeal for the world peace. With this information came a deep sense of resignation as well as determination. She understood her father's situation. She knew about the ailments that would afflict him as he approached death and what could be done mitigate his suffering. She also experienced a strong feeling of empathy for those who had suffered in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and was comforted and encouraged by their bravery. Whatever has happened and can't be undone. But instead of spending time and energy cultivating resentment and anger, why not utilize this experience to learn how to help others who come after us? The Japanese people featured in the documentary film and the hibakusha who carefully recorded their life stories all knew that their days were numbered, but they still tried to let the world know what they had experienced so that they could learn from their suffering. At this point, she knew her father was very close to the end of his life, but because of the effects she and her father had made because of the efforts she and her father had made to care for one another, she had a strong sense that they had done their best and beyond, and there was nothing to regret. However, there was still one thing she was concerned about, and this was the reason she was looking for me. A while ago, she had accidentally caught sight of her father coming out of that building. She was searching for a word. And then when I suggested, "Do you mean synagogue?" She said yes, shyly. And she told me that even though she and her father had never spoken about his religion, she wanted to respect his heritage, and she wanted to know if there was anything specific that needed to be done for him as a Jew. When I mentioned that she needed to speak with a rabbi, I found out she didn't even know the word rabbi. So much so, religion was deprived. And furthermore, it was now after sundown on a Friday. This is the reason why I mentioned it is Friday. And then she didn't know that it was a Shabbat or what that means. Now it was my turn to go into action. So what can I do at this point? The hospice I worked for was originated as an organization dedicated to the support of Jewish immigrants at the end of the 19th century. And even now, there was a strong Jewish element in the hospital, in the hospice. And I had a long list of rabbis I could call in case I needed Jewish-specific spiritual and religious support. But this was Shabbat, and many observant Jews would not be even taking phone calls. I started to calling one number after another from the top of the list to the bottom, and met with one answering service after another. Then I remembered a rabbi I knew in my neighborhood. My neighborhood was at that time Washington Heights. Rabbi Stefan. Washington Heights traditionally had a large Jewish community. Among the many rabbis I had worked with, Rabbi Stefan had particularly impressed me with his attitudes that for compassionate needs, you can change the rules and regulations spontaneously. I called Rabbi Stefan, I got his answering machine, but I kept on speaking and I was explaining the situation. The rabbi, who was monitoring the machine, decided to pick up and answer the call. He agreed to travel from the northern tip of Manhattan all the way down to the East Village, despite the hour and the Shabbat. Sitting quietly with the patient's daughter at his bedside, I waited for the rabbi to get there. When Rabbi Stefan arrived and started talking with the daughter, I felt it was all right for me to end my visit and leave the patient and his daughter in the trusted hands of this kind and generous rabbi. By the time I left the inpatient unit, it was already 9 p.m. Then I talk about a little bit about the theology. Dogen study tends to become very heady, and but I really don't like to stay in conceptual understanding Buddhist texts, particularly Dogen study. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I usually bring those teaching into our own life, my own life. and daily practice and daily, actions, everything I do. And then eventually I somehow find those teaching really illuminates my days. The last chapter of Shishobo, Dogen's Shobo Genzo Shishobo, Bodhisattva's four embracing actions, is about Doji, which Okumura Roshi skillfully translates as identity action. Do means same or together, and Doji refers to the action of an individual self that identifies with all beings as a part of one interdependent reality. This do is a very difficult word to translate into English. Yes, on the surface it is same and at the same time or together, but what are we together with is the question. We are always together with everything, but at the same time as a human being, we also have to function as a one out of all. But at the same time, we always need to keep that understanding and clarity. At the same time, we are all out of all. So in this case, this same together should be translated as an identity. So my identity is a part of all, but at the same time, I am all of all. So in another word, as I mentioned earlier in this essay, when something happens far away, we feel we have nothing to do with it. But actually, we are always with it. Whatever happens all the way away, it is actually something for me, with me, impacting me. So identity action can take place when the individual self and universal self are not viewed. This individual self is what Uchiyama Roshi calls one out of all me. And universal self is what Uchiyama Roshi often says, all out of all me. I think that's a very understandable explanation. And of course, those Uchiyama Roshi's teaching has been translated by Okumura Roshi. You might already have read some of those. In my mind, doji or identity action is a synonym with another expression that appears in Zen literature very often, doshi dosho, which means dying together, living together. I think we are always living together with everything. We are always dying together with everything. So that's something that shows up in Zen text very often, this expression. Whether we recognize it or not, whether we are aware of it or not, we are always living and dying together with all things in Indra's net. Our individual being is so small and limited that no matter how enlightened we may feel we are never able to perceive our connections with all myriad of things all over the time. As a matter of fact, it is impossible because we are part of this entirety. From here, we cannot see the entirety. Because if you say, I saw the entirety, that means you separated yourself out of this entirety, which cannot be happen. So as a practice, no matter how you feel, how we feel, how I feel, enlightened I am, my task is keep on widening, keep on deepening, keep on going. That's all we can do. That's all we should do. So, but sometimes this unimaginable, immense network of interdependent origination creates a wonderful crash, so to speak, of events that enables us to see the reality of living together and dying together very clearly. So for instance, the people of Hiroshima, Nagasaki in August 1945, and then people of Chernobyl in 1986, that's when that horrific accident happened. And then 12-year-old Issan, that means I don't remember, 1969, 1970 maybe, spending sleepless night in 1970 in Japan. And the young daughter of Chernobyl accident survivor, discovering record left behind by survivors in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. By that time, it was 1990s, yes? And then all these things happened in a different time and place. And then she, because of that, coming to a strong compassionate resolution. Although on the surface, these appear to be separate events occurring in different places at separate times, all these incidents and the individuals ended up coming together when a dying man's devoted daughter encountered a Japanese-born hospice chaplain in the East Village of New York City in 2000s. Thus enabling us to recognize that we are actually all related and inseparable. All these events somehow wondrously brought us together and allowed us to recognize that we are always living and dying together. With that recognition, what can we do together right here, right now? After all, what we have is right here, right now. That's all we have. So what can we do is our practice. The image I have now is one of the pond of perfectly still water. Just imagine, you probably have this image. You probably have your own favorite pond in the middle of the forests or woods. I do too. And then in those, pond, it's so nice to stand along the pond or lake. It's so still and quiet, isn't it? And then a stone is dropped into the pond. You may be throwing the stone into the pond as well. And then starting from the point where the dropped stone hits the water, waves are created, which propagates outward first. When a wave finally reaches the shore where I stand, how can I receive the wave? As the wave hits the shore, it does not disappear. Instead, the shore sends the wave back towards the epicenter. Isn't that true? So, in the same way, we can receive the wave, transform the quality of the wave, and send a wholesome wave back to the source of the wave. Depending on what we do with it right now, right here, the meaning of a situation or series of events, no matter how devastating it was, can be transformed. Meaning can be transformed because the meaning we learn from is right here, right now. That is when healing becomes possible. This is actually the reason I really was attracted to Buddhist teaching. In 1980s up to 90s, I really experienced so many deaths around me, including at one point, my closest assistant I worked with every single day ended up quitting the job and went back home and hanged himself because his partner died of AIDS and he didn't want to die like that. And then eventually, I also took care of my former friend. And when he was diagnosed with HIV and his whole family members refused to take him in. So he came to me and asked me if he could come back to my apartment. He used to live in my apartment. So I said yes. And then I ended up taking care of him almost exclusively because his family members didn't want to be involved for the last 3 years of his life. And at that time, there was no hospice program was possible. And then there was just so many incredible, tragic stories. I'm going to save you from that. But, there was another, I think it was HBO, movie created out of Larry Kramer's book called Normal Heart. everything you see in that movie is actually true. It really did happen, multiple numbers of that. And it happened to me too. So therefore, I was really trying to see if there's any world religion or spiritual practice could actually give me some sort of answer. And of course, you have to practice it to find your own answer. But the Buddhism, particularly this point of how Buddhism sees the world, how Buddhism's view is about time and space is like, was really healing to me. Doji, or identity action, going back to the essay, is an action affecting this individual me. This individual me is acted upon, formed by the action of the entirety or whole of existence. In other words, to make it very simple, I am here because of the air I breathe in, food I take in, and then how I am is a result of, well, history, education, etc., etc., and language, because language makes me express how I feel. And the language has thousands of history of all these millions of billions of people. So therefore, how I am now is really created by all of this. But at the same time, I also have to function as me, as an individual me in this world. So this is shikisokuze kukusokuze shiki. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form is coming in the teaching. But at the same time, this individual me can act wholesomely together with the whole entirety. As a matter of fact, we are always being acted upon and acting upon others, receiving waves, sending them back simultaneously, all the time, moment by moment. The years I have spent in realm of end-of-life care generously, graciously offered many wonderful opportunities for clarifying the true reality of the world. For those moments when Dogen's teaching were clearly manifested in real life experiences and actual events, I was truly grateful. I think I had a really good job because not only I experienced my own life, but because of this type of job you experience, you have a wonderful situation that many of those people share their lives with you generously. So therefore, you really get to see many multiple numbers of life experiences, which I believe all of them are talked about in immense numbers of Buddhist texts. Uchiyama Roshi often says in his teaching, if you have some questions about your own life, go back to Buddhist text, because Buddhist text probably talks about every single episode you as a human being may encounter. And it is really true. I have done that myself as well. And it is really nice to carry that teaching and then really practice it in your daily life. And if you have some particular types of jobs, it's a great situation. You can really enhance your practice that way. So in that sense, I'm truly grateful, I said here. Afterward, okay, so this is the end of the essay. And then I added something. Because I said I had avoided to go to Nagasaki and Hiroshima for a long time. But actually, this is what happened. When I was explained that I don't have any deadline for this essay, and then Hoko-san asked all of us to write something kind of short. This is a short essay, nearly a year before the publishing of the book. So I thought I had time. But then I waited until December, year 2022. And then I started to receive the email like, are you done? So I didn't know what to write. But coincidentally, I went to Nagasaki at that time. I wrote this essay on December 24th in Nagasaki, Japan. On this day, I visited Nagasaki Atomic Bomb Museum for the first time in my life. Then I remembered this episode that took place several years before that. Then I thought, maybe this is a good thing, a good episode to write about for Doji. I visited the Nagasaki Atomic Bomb Museum for the first time in my life. Later, I went to visit Urakami Cathedral to join their Christmas Eve Mass. Yes, I'm very interfaith. Urakami Cathedral was the largest Catholic church in Asia in 1945. It stood about 500 yards away from the epicenter, and it was instantly destroyed by the atomic bomb on August 9th, 1945. The cathedral has been rebuilt from scratch and is now the center of the world peace movement. The special prayer chapel for Hibakusha built nearby was lit with the colors of the Ukrainian flag. Around that time, there was a threat from Russia utilizing nuclear weapon on Ukraine. So therefore, this Urakami Cathedral went right into support for anti-nuclear weapon. So therefore, as a symbolic manner for stating that, they were lighting this up in Ukrainian flag color, yellow and blue. So this was my writing. I'm sorry I used up all the time. But if you do have a question, please send me an email and I can respond to by email. Either to Great Tree, or we do have a small group dedicated to Shikanta Zazazen and also Dogen study in New York City. And then you can send your inquiry about your question to our website. Our website is nyzcfordogenstudy.org. And so there's an email portion there too. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now we'd like to give back the merit. It's a call and response. May the merit of this practice benefit all beings and bring peace. Thank you very much for your time and for your writing and your speaking. We appreciate it greatly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, David. Are you still there? Okay, he's not. Oh, there he is. He decided, he remembered. Yeah. Hey, David.
Did you stop recording?
Where is it? Where'd it go? Okay. Okay. I think you can turn it off at the top. Oh, wait a minute. I gotta get the. There we go.